authorities at all levels, and in the past 11 months, we've provided the FBI with more than 1,000 actionable tips. Our 25 offices across the country engage directly with individuals and institutions affected by hate. In 2017, ADL launched the Center for Technology and Society to double down on our efforts to fight online hate. We were the first civil rights group with an operation right in the heart of Silicon Valley, and it's staffed not by longtime nonprofit professionals, but by software engineers, product managers, data scientists, and computer experts, all hired from industry. We conduct analysis, publish research, build technology, and provide recommendations to policymakers like yourselves and industry leaders. Today, there is no distinction between online and offline lives. When we say that Facebook is the front line in fighting hate, I mean that literally. We've seen over and over again the way that hateful content online leads to violence in our communities offline. Poway, El Paso, Pittsburgh. These targeted mass shootings were motivated by extremist conspiracy theories that were spawned and spread on social media. In addition to these tragedies, online hate affects the everyday lives of millions of Americans. Our research has found that 41% of users report experiencing online hate and harassment. According to ADL's most recent analysis, 75% of those harassed report that it happened to them on Facebook. That's nearly 3 times the percentage on any other platform. And make no mistake, all of them are highly profitable companies. So this isn't a resource problem. It's a responsibility problem. Just today, ADL released new research demonstrating how easy it is to find white supremacist, accelerationist content on Instagram less than 24 hours after the CEO sat at another table just like this and said they were cleaning up their mess. But these platforms lack and neglect safety because first and foremost, they're exempt from liability due to the loophole of Section 230. Now, I know that isn't the topic of today's hearing, but make no mistake, Section 230 must be changed to force the companies to play by the same rules that every other media company on the landscape operates by today. It's just not a matter of free speech. It's simply being held accountable in courts of law when the platforms aid and abet unlawful, even lethal conduct in service of their growth and revenue. Tech companies are complicit in the hate and violence on their platforms because if it bleeds, it leads, and it feeds their business model and their bottom line. Hate speech, conspiracy theories, they are amplified by the algorithms, nudged to the top of their news feeds, and they addict users like a narcotic, driving engagement, which in turn increases their profits. With no oversight and no incentives beyond increasing revenue, tech companies will continue to do whatever they can, whatever it takes, to optimize engagement regardless of the consequences. This just can't continue. If not for courageous whistleblowers like Frances Haugen, we wouldn't have the hard evidence to prove that Facebook knowingly is mainstreaming extremism, inciting violence through its algorithms, and fracturing societies around the world. What if other tech companies, tech employees, felt empowered and protected to expose wrongdoing when they saw it? That's why the protections, Congresswoman Schakowsky, in your FTC Whistleblower Act are so crucial. If platforms have no meaningful motivation to fix the harmful algorithms that amplify hate, they won't do it. That's why the Algorithmic Justice and Online Transparency Act that would protect consumers from harmful and discriminatory AI systems are really long overdue. So we applaud that legislation as well. Finally, to stay ahead of the curve, we've got to prioritize research. In August, ADL Belfer Fellow and NYU professor Laura Edelson was deplatformed on Facebook hours after the company realized that she and her team were studying the role that Facebook may have played in leading up to the January 6th insurrection. Platforms should not be able to thwart important third-party research at their whim. Bills like the Social Media Data Act would ensure that academics can study platforms to better inform the public. Look, there are no silver bullets. There's no one-size-fits-all solution to repairing our internet, but there's a lot you can do right now to take action. I've highlighted 3 bills, and I'm happy to talk about them and others in the Q&A. But members of the committee, let me conclude by urging you to remember that what happens online has a real impact on our lives. The status quo directly threatens our kids, our communities, and our country. Now is the time for you to legislate and act. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Jonathan Greenblatt, CEO of the Anti-Defamation League.
I thank the gentleman, and now we have remotely with us today Dr. Marshall, and you are recognized now for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Good morning, and thank you to all of you for inviting me to testify today. I'm Natalie Marichal, Policy and Partnerships Manager at Ranking Digital Rights. As Congress crafts legislation to hold big tech accountable for its negative impacts on society, I urge you to focus on upstream structural reforms by regulating online advertising, mandating transparency and research access to data, and encouraging the Securities and Exchange Commission to use its existing regulatory authority to do what shareholders are unable to. Get big tech to comply with the same laws as all other public companies and to improve their corporate governance. The tenor and substance of congressional hearings on the tech industry has come a long way in the past few years, thanks to a growing recognition that the harms users experience through social media platforms are connected to business models centered on maximizing revenue from targeted advertising. This business model incentivizes rapid growth, anti-competitive behavior, like predatory acquisitions of would-be competitors and vertical integration across the ad tech value chain, mass commercial surveillance and data collection without our knowledge or consent, reliance on automation to perform tasks that actually require human nuance and contextual judgment to be done correctly, and consolidation of corporate power that thwarts any internal attempt at reform. The company now known as Meta is the most brazen example of these dynamics, but the basic point that how a company makes money plays a determinant role in its products and its behavior is true across the tech sector and beyond. A business model that relies on the violation of rights will necessarily lead to products that create and amplify harms. So what should Congress do about it? First, regulate the online advertising industry. Transpose the basic principles that govern offline advertising to the online world, and pursue antitrust enforcement in the ad tech sector. These measures will directly address consumer and civil rights harms related to privacy, discrimination, and fraud in online advertising. They will also shift the incentive structures that contribute to product design and corporate decisions that harm consumers and destabilize democracies around the world. Further, increased competition in the ad tech market will undercut the Alphabet and Meta duopoly and enable greater accountability for these 2 mega corporations that often behave as though they are above the law. Second, create the conditions for evidence-based policymaking by mandating specific types of transparency for information that can safely be made public, and by creating mechanisms for qualified, trustworthy, industry-independent researchers to verify companies' claims about users' experiences and expand knowledge and understanding about how these platforms impact societies and democracy around the world. The RDR methodology and the Santa Clara principles on transparency and accountability and content moderation both provide granular recommendations for the data that companies should disclose publicly. And third, Congress should encourage the SEC to use its authority to do what shareholders have been trying to do and have been unable to do for reasons I will explain. Get big tech to comply with the same laws as all other publicly traded companies. Numerous whistleblower disclosures to the SEC indicate that several big tech companies are violating securities laws, but because of their dual-class share structure, shareholders are unable to hold corporate management accountable. When the CEO is also the chair of the board of directors, this means that person is accountable to no one. I am talking about Mark Zuckerberg. No one should have this much power. The SEC must address the private market exemptions that have allowed big tech companies to become so large and with concentrated governance. Because Meta was able to obtain significant private market funding before going public, the company was able to impose this dual-class share structure and a governance structure that allows Mark Zuckerberg to unilaterally make decisions that impact billions of people without any accountability. This loophole must be closed so that shareholder democracy of the future Facebooks can take hold. To address the excesses of today's big tech firms, the SEC should issue an enforcement policy declaring that it will not grant bad actor waivers to, and will seek increased enforcement penalties for, companies with Class B shares or those in which a single person serves as CEO and chair of the company's board of directors. The bills under consideration today all seek to shine a light on big tech's secretive business practices and hold them accountable when they harm their users, their competitors, or society more broadly, whether through deliberate action or through their failure to proactively identify and mitigate potential harms ahead of time. The Republican Big Tech Accountability Platform also contains many provisions that Ranking Digital Rights has long called for. Transparency into how big tech develops its content policies, and regular periodic disclosures about content policy enforcement, including the types of content taken down and why, and clearly understood appeals processes. Big tech accountability is not a partisan issue. Americans may disagree about how social media companies should govern content on their platforms, but there is strong bipartisan agreement that big tech is not above the law, and that whatever companies do, they should be transparent about it, and they should be accountable to their users, their shareholders, and the American people. Legislation should start there. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Natalie Marshall, Ranking Digital Rights Senior Policy and Partnerships Manager.
Thank you so much. And now, let me recognize Mr. Lane. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Chair Schakowsky, Ranking Member Bilirakis, Chairman Polone, Ranking Member McMorris-Rogers, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify. My name is Rick Lane, and I am the CEO of strategic advisory firm Iggy Ventures. I also volunteer my time to help child safety organizations combat sex trafficking and other online threats to children. Over the past 30 years, I had the opportunity to work on almost every major piece of technology-related consumer protection, privacy, and cybersecurity legislation that has moved through Congress. I testify today in my personal capacity. Building a more safe, secure, and sustainable internet will require Congress to focus on 4 main issues. 1, reforming Section 230. 2, creating more transparency in the way internet platforms operate while protecting internet users' privacy. 3, restoring access to the WHOIS data. And 4, updating the Child Online Privacy Protection Act. These issues do not necessarily need to be addressed in a single comprehensive piece of legislation, but they should be discussed in a comprehensive fashion. All the pieces must fit together. I recognize that Section 230 reform is the province of another subcommittee and was the focus of last week's hearing. I would be remiss, however, if I didn't take this opportunity to make a few observations on the topic. I believe we need to restore to platforms the ordinary duty of care that would apply but for courts' current and overbroad application of Section 230. Social media companies are rife with offers to sell illegal drugs, yet the former CEO of TikTok stated at a 2020 technology event that he had never been told of illicit drug transactions on the platform and doubted their very existence. That was a surprising statement since others knew, including the drug dealers that were using TikTok's platform. TikTok could also increase the threat of espionage and cyber attacks in light of the influence the Chinese government has over both it and ByteDance, the Chinese company that owns TikTok. Indeed, we are confronted with a social networking site that is A, susceptible to manipulation by a communist regime with a record of human rights abuses, B, growing more rapidly than any U.S. competitor, and C, collecting massive amounts of data on our youngest and most easily influenced demographic in an arms race to develop more sophisticated artificial intelligence. It It's for these reasons that both H.R. 3991, telling everyone the location of data leaving the U.S. Act, introduced by Rep. Duncan, and H.R. 4000, the Internet Application ID Act, introduced by Rep. Kinzinger, are so important. These two bills together will provide the American people with the information they need to know exactly where these types of companies are headquartered, where their data is being stored, and to fully understand the risk they and their children are taking when using these apps that can be used to undermine our democracy. Another transparency issue that Congress needs to address is access to accurate WHOIS domain name registration, which contains basic contact details for holders of internet domains and is fundamental to protecting consumer privacy, promoting lawful commerce, ensuring public safety, and protecting our national security. Indeed, a Department of Justice side report states that the first step in online reconnaissance often involves use of ICANN's WHOIS database. In 2018, registries and registrars like GoDaddy, VeriSign, Namecheap increasingly began restricting access to WHOIS data based on an overlap application of the European Union GDPR. Yet, almost after 5 years of, quote, trying to fix the WHOIS GDPR problem, ICANN has failed. The time has therefore come for this committee and Congress to pass legislation requiring domain name registries and registrars to once again make WHOIS information available, and that will be zero cost to consumers. In no other area of consumer protection is more important than establishing reasonable policies to protect children in the marketplace. This is especially true in the area of online privacy and market-dominant digital payment apps and debit cards that target children and collect and exploit a shocking amount of their data. COPPA, enacted in 1998, creates an opt-in parental consent privacy regime for websites directed at children under 13. By contrast, Gramm-Leach-Bliley, enacted in 1999, created an opt-out privacy regime for financial institutions. That privacy space between COPPA and GLBA creates a fintech child privacy protection gap in existing law. This gap is especially harmful as we move toward a cashless society, a trend accelerated by the pandemic. The good news is that one company, FinTech Digital Wallet Company, which I am involved with, Rego Payments, is the only COPPA-compliant digital wallet. Thank you again for giving me this opportunity to participate today. I look forward to your questions and continue to work with you and your staff. We must all work together to fix these important problems because at the end of the day, it is the right thing to do. Thank you.
Rick Lane, CEO of Iggy Ventures.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Golan, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Schakowsky, Ranking Member Bilirakis, and distinguished members of the subcommittee for holding this important hearing. My name is Josh Golan, and I'm Executive Director of Fair Play, the leading independent watchdog of the children's media and marketing industries. Through corporate campaign and strategic regulatory filings, we have changed the marketing and data collection practices of some of the world's biggest companies. Currently, we are leading a campaign to stop Facebook from launching a children's version of Instagram. And last week, with other leading advocates, we launched Design with Kids in Mind, a campaign to demand regulations that require online operators put kids' interests first when designing their platforms. Frances Haugen has shown a critical spotlight on Instagram's harmful impacts on teens and Facebook's callous disregard for children's well-being. But it would be a mistake to view her revelations as problems limited to Facebook and Instagram. Compulsive overuse, exposure to harmful content, cyberbullying, harms to mental health, and the sexual exploitation of children are industry-wide issues that demand systemic solutions from Congress. To put it plainly, the unregulated business model for digital media is fundamentally at odds with children's well-being. Digital platforms are designed to maximize revenue and therefore engagement because the longer they can capture a user's attention, the more money they make by collecting data and serving ads. As a result, children are subject to relentless pressure and manipulative design that pushes them to use and check platforms as often as possible. This harms young people in several ways, including encouraging the overuse of social media and displacing critical online activities like sleep, exercise, and face-to-face interactions. Overuse can also lead to isolation from secure family relationships and reduced interest in academic achievement and extracurricular activities, allowing for-profit tech companies to shape children's character, habits, and future. Design choices used to maximize engagement are also harmful because they exploit young people's desire for social approval and their natural tendency towards risk-taking. Displays of likes and follower counts provide an instant snapshot of whose profiles and posts are popular. Children quickly learn that the way to improve these metrics is to post risque and provocative content, creating a permanent record of their youthful indiscretions and increasing their risk of cyberbullying and sexual exploitation. Platforms also harm young people by personalizing and recommending content most likely to keep them engaged. One former YouTube engineer observed, recommendation algorithms are designed to optimize watch time, not to show content that is actually good for kids. This means that on platforms like Instagram and TikTok, teens interested in dieting will be barraged with content promoting eating disorders, and a depressed user will be shown content promoting self-harm. Nearly every concern that parents, public health professionals, and children themselves have about digital media platforms can be traced to deliberate design choices. It doesn't have to be this way. Apps and online platforms